and Heritage Mom blog on social media. I'm an author of a couple of books related to parenting and education. I'm a home educator. I've been homeschooling my children who are 15, 13, 11, and 9 since the beginning. And today I'm going to talk to you about what I've discovered as the promises of poetry. Um, the first time my voice cracked at the raw emotion incited by a poet's words, I was completely caught off guard. It was a compelling moment because I didn't know what to make of it because I wasn't fully invested in a life of lingering over stanzas and considering the meaning of unexpected words. There's a British educator named Charlotte Mason who wrote, "Poetry takes first rank as a means of intellectual culture." Still, even as I began to recognize the power of poetry to heal and guide, I struggled to morph a school lesson with my children into a meaningful pursuit apart from dissecting each verse bit by bit, which is how I had learned to interact with poetry throughout my education. But slowly and nearly imperceptibly, I began to truly experience poetry. And today I want to share a bit of my journey as we discuss the role and the promises of poetry in our children's lives and the children whose work we touch in our various forms. So I can sheepishly confess that I have not been someone who loved poetry. It wasn't something that I felt very connected to in much of any way. I had experienced it as a child, but I thought it's not that I didn't think that my kids would enjoy it, but I felt like I wasn't connected to it enough to consider it to be a valuable part of their education. And the more that I read of different types of pedagogy and different educational philosophies, I realized that there could be a place for poetry in what I was doing, but I was uncertain what that place would be or how to mm, kind of how to give it a serious place in my children's education, I guess I would say, or in the work that I do in general. Um, Let me see here. One second, guys. I'm trying to share my screen here. I hope that it will come up. So sorry. Okay, well, I think it's thinking here for a second. So, in the meantime, I just want to share that um, I'm going to share several quotes today from a monthly British magazine called The Parents Review. It was founded in 1890 to support and inspire parents and educators, and it was kind of envisioned as a gathering place for parents or a way to nourish the minds of those who were guiding children's growth. The articles discuss child development and literature and art and music and faith. And other practical ideas to help families cultivate a rich, thoughtful home life that was centered around living ideas in a broad and generous curriculum. So there are quotes in here from other things, but I just wanted to give you a little background of where that's coming from, and that some of these ideas that I share, although they sound so new, I mean, that's what is attractive. They're old ideas. They're not ancient ideas, but they're old ideas. And the fact that they're still so relevant for what we're doing today makes them worthy of discussion and consideration. So let me, hold on. I cannot believe, I don't know why I'm having, do I have
And
sharing
if you want to
permission?
send it to me, I can. You do. You should.
Okay, okay.
Um,
Let me try this.
Try that. Try it again. I did. It was already. I put it so multiple can share. Maybe it's. I don't know.
Okay. I'm so sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
It's just spinning. Let's see. Yes, I don't have to have the slides, but because I'm doing these quotes, it will be so much more pleasant experience for you guys if the slides are there.
I think James has a question. Yes,
Anika,
James.
Denise, as I look at our list of participants, you're listed as host, but I don't see Amber having any um, Zoom identity other than the rest of us have. So could you try again to make her either co-host? That might allow her to share.
Okay, because Shayna was able, yes, I'll do that. Shayna was able to
Okay,
share
I
too,
think
though.
it's
But
coming
let me
up. Did
see.
Yeah, I
okay, it
shared,
looks like it
okay.
came up on
Um,
my end. Can you guys see it?
yep, there we go. Okay. Yes, it's
Okay.
coming.
All right, there we go. I'm so sorry.
It's
I don't know what
yep.
happened. Of course, technology,
No, you're
it
fine.
doesn't love us. Um, okay, so let me see here. Okay, so I want to share this quote with you. It's coming, it's by M.H. Simpson from the Parents Review, which I just mentioned to you. And it kind of sets up the ideas that I was researching and learning about as I was beginning to introduce poetry to my children. So to inspire us with a sense of something beyond our transitory aims and cares, to give us a glimpse of what is real and lasting, to hold up before us that mirror in which the true and the false assume their right shapes, and nature, art, life are seen as God made them, and not as we have disfigured them. These are poetry's true functions. I believe most sincerely that the poets do this for us, and that by our ignorance of what they have written, we are depriving ourselves of a glorious heritage. It's a matter of which it is difficult to convince others, the fact being that it is only by the constant study of poetry that we come to a realization of all it can do for us. Like all the arts, it must be practiced if it is to have any meaning for us. You do not expect to have a perfect appreciation of Beethoven without training. And I think that that helps us to all understand the first time maybe some of us heard Beethoven, definitely a child, they aren't necessarily like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to listen to this all the time. But as somebody who played the cello throughout all childhood, it was that type of music, you develop a taste for it. And the same can be said for poetry. It was certainly my ignorance of what they have written that at one time threatened to deprive my children of this glorious heritage. And because I speak so frequently of my deep desire to connect my children with their cultural heritage, I find it ironic that I was nearly willing to deny them a link to their broader heritage or those things like poetry, which can bind all human hearts. So now, I know that I always knew my kids could get something from poetry or that all children could get things from poetry. So it's not that, but again, it's the tastes were not implanted in my childhood and I didn't feel like I had missed out on anything. So I wasn't necessarily striving to find out what is it that's so great? What is this glorious heritage all about? And sometimes it seems impossible to miss something that you've never experienced. So my youngest child, who has never had meat, he just doesn't react at all. He's not lured by the smell of bacon frying in the pan. But my older three children can be found hovering and reminiscing when they're faced with that old familiar friend, that scent. So despite having neither bacon level interest nor nostalgia to stand on, I did commit to at least sampling every bit of the poetic feast before determining that one part or another didn't satisfy my taste or my children's palates. And so, with quiet trepidation, I moved forward with a guarded yet open mind. In winter, I get up at night and dress by yellow candlelight. In summer, quite the other way, I have to go to bed by day. I have to go to bed and see the birds still hopping on the tree or hear the grown-up people's feet still going past me in the street. And does it not seem hard to you when all the sky is clear and blue and I should like so much to play to have to go to bed by day? That's Bed in Summer by Robert Louis Stevenson. And it was the poem I read to my children on our first official day of homeschool over 10 years ago. And I remember feeling nervous because aside from my years of nursery rhymes, I hadn't read a poem that I'd actually enjoyed since elementary school. And I was concerned that my children would start asking me questions and I wouldn't have a teacher worthy answer. And so though I inherently knew that poetry can simply be enjoyed and it doesn't always have to be picked apart limb by limb, The thought that I would read a poem aloud only for it to linger in space and meander through our minds was unsettling. It felt almost too easy. So there's a Parents Review article that beautifully encompasses what I, even in my naive lack of interest in poetry, was curiously demanding to be convinced of. If we ask children to dissect a poem, to pull apart its innards and examine each organ and put it together again, and then regard it as a treasure, then it spoils our intent. The temple stands before us ethereal, beautiful, reared like Milton's to music, and instead of entering and worshiping, we break down its walls and calcine its stones and submit them to chemical analysis and imagine we have discovered its secret. Or to change the metaphor, we are asked for the essence of the flower, and we pull it to pieces and examine its petals and its stamens and pronounce triumphantly on its order and suborder, its genus and its species. But the color and the perfume make up its life. Where are they? The flower spirit has shrouded himself in these, and when they died, he unfolded his wings and fled, and what remains is no flower at all, only lifeless dust. Now, that's not to say that a poem should never be studied. At an address given to the Conference of Educational Associations, poet Monk Gibbon said, "The study of poetry is only important as a means of its enjoyment, and that where children are concerned, the first step is to see that they enjoy, after which they will probably take the second step for themselves, namely the trouble to study those poets whose work needs some preliminary elucidation if it is to be appreciated." So the difference, it seems, is one of desire. Rather than force children to pick apart poetry, we can help them to enjoy the poetry, and they will want to study to better appreciate what they encounter. So I think that's a really important point, because often when I talk about poetry and I'm saying, don't just pick it apart and study all the rhythm and the pentameter and the sonnets versus, this and the way that we would prepare for an AP exam, or the way we may approach poetry when we're in deeper, higher academic study, because the child hasn't learned to love it yet. And so until they learn to enjoy the poetry, they won't, they'll do what you tell them to do, but they won't have that desire or hunger for more. And so once they're done with school, they won't continue that relationship with the poetry. So first, we want them to enjoy it. And as they enjoy it, they'll want to study it more. Gibbon went on to say that you will never make a girl or boy like a poem against their will. I just love that sentence. It's just not going to happen. You will never bully them into it or argue them into it. You may convert them by indirect means, by infecting them by your own zest. Take care that such zest is genuine. Children are never converted by shams, but you can't beat poetry into them, and you will be disappointed if you try. In fact, it is a very immoral proceeding indeed if you do try, nearly as immoral as trying to bludgeon someone into accepting your religious convictions under pretense of saving their soul. Poetry and religion are the two things to which sham appreciation or sham loyalty are forbidden. They touch the soul so intimately that anything that is forced or insincere in our attitude towards them destroys their usefulness for us. So as we discovered the sweetness of some of childhood's most recommended poems, my family began to find tiny gifts tucked between the lines. I would say gifts of hope and gifts of history, and even uproarious imagery. In fact, the first time my daughter, my youngest daughter, shared a poem from memory, she had picked it up, by the way, without intention, as I prepared to recite some fun verses at a National Poetry Month event one April in our town. The sweet poem was long and required quite deliberate attention to enunciation for such a young child. So to hear her exacting words as she raised her arms to cheer for the chocolate cat, her edition, like not mine, was a memory that will be firmly lodged for all my remaining years. Have you ever heard of the sugar plum tree? 'Tis a marvel of great renown. It blooms on the shore of the Lollipop Sea in the garden of Shut-Eye Town. The fruit that it bears is so wondrously sweet, as those who have tasted it say, that good little children have only to eat of that fruit to be happy next day. When you've got to the tree, you would have a hard time to capture the fruit which I sing. The tree is so tall that no person could climb to the boughs where the sugar plums swing. But up in that tree sits a chocolate cat, and a gingerbread dog prowls below. And this is the way you contrive to get at those sugar plums tempting you so. You say but the word to that gingerbread dog, and he barks with such terrible zest that the chocolate cat is at once all agog, as her swelling proportions attest. And the chocolate cat goes cavorting around from this leafy limb unto that, and the sugar plums tumble, of course, to the ground. Hooray for that chocolate cat! There are marshmallows, gumdrops, and peppermint canes with stripings of scarlet or gold, and you carry away of the treasure that reigns as much as your apron can hold. So come, little child, cuddle closer to me in your dainty white nightcap and gown, and I'll rock you away to that sugar plum tree in the garden of Shut-Eye Town. That's by Eugene Field. So as time passed, verses began to give voice when my pen remained idle on unforgiving blank paper. When close friends, even to this day, experience unimaginable loss, I often find myself at like at a loss for words. It's hard for me to know what to say, even though my heart is filled with emotion for them. Poetry solves that problem for me time and time again, and I've taught my children to look at the volumes of poetry on our shelves when they pen thank you cards or share notes of encouragement with a young friend. When one of our neighbors lost our father, I included a note card with a single stanza from Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's Song for the People. It said, "Our world, so worn and weary, needs music, pure and strong, to hush the jangle and discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong." She later shared that she was so moved by that stanza that she looked up the entire poem and felt encouraged by the hope and comfort it held. It begins, "Let me make the songs for the people, songs for the old and young, songs to stir like a battle cry wherever they are sung." My neighbor's sentiments reminded me that in the past, I've also shared Bible verses as comfort. And as I thought of the verses I'm most likely to quote, I experienced a magical moment of clarity that the word of God, which I've always held dear, is bursting full of poetry. It was a glorious connection. In addition to the poetic books themselves, Psalm, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Lamentations, these alone amount to around 1/3 of the Old Testament. There are large sections of poetry in other biblical books, well over half of Isaiah, over 1/3 of Jeremiah, around 1/5 of Ezekiel, as well as more than half of the materials in the so-called minor prophets, Hosea to Malachi. There are other poetic sections in the narrative books, such as Hannah's Psalm and 1 Samuel. Then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God." Altogether, then, more than half of the Old Testament is poetry, and the Old Testament makes up more than 2/3 of the Bible. And there are even some poetic sections in the New Testament. Poetry of the Bible is important, and obviously, and I was very familiar with it, and I gained confidence in recognizing that through our exploration of verse and experience with poetic language, I had a lot of experience. So my experience wasn't absent, it was just incomplete. Though I don't think that the Bible is the only entry point into poetry. I think for many students who have grown up and are accustomed to hearing Bible verses, for them to be reminded that so much of it is poetic, and that they actually already know or are already quite familiar with a lot of poetic language or poems, I think can be a great connection point. So though I don't demand a moral or choose to use poems as a rod, they have naturally lent themselves as moral guides young children, requiring no extra help from my lips. Sometimes poems make an example of the time wasted on sibling squabbles, as in The Quarrel by Eleanor Farjeon. I quarreled with my brother. I don't know what about. One thing led to another, and somehow we fell out. The start of it was slight. The end of it was strong. He said he was right. I knew he was wrong. We hated one another. The afternoon turned black. Then suddenly my brother thumped me on the back and said, "Oh, come on. We can't go on all night. I was in the wrong." So he was in the right. At other times, poems highlight the folly of acting out in anger, like when we read She Was a Pretty Little Girl by Ramon Perez de Ayala. She was a pretty little girl. They spoke to her with all tenderness and gave her sweet caresses. This little girl had a doll. The doll was very fair, and her name, without question, was Cordelia. Once upon a time, this is how it was. The doll, of course, did not speak. She said nothing to the little girl. "Why do you not talk like everyone else and say tender words to me?" the little girl asked the doll. The doll answered not a word. The little girl, angry, flew into temper. She threw the doll upon the floor and she stamped on it and broke it. And then, by a miracle, before she died, the doll spoke. "I loved you more than anyone, but I was not able to tell it. Once upon a time, this is how it was." Our poetry time offers an opportunity for gentle introspection and self-correction, and this feels like the whipped cream on top of my child's favorite frozen treat. Never missed, but always welcomed. And author MAW had much to say of this in a Certain Parents Review issue. Why do we teach poetry? Some will say because of the moral lessons inculcated by means of it. Others, because it strengthens the memory and, if only hard enough, the reasoning powers. Others, because it illustrates history or grammar or etymology, or because it affords useful practice in analysis or composition. Now, I want today to plead for the teaching of poetry for its own sake, as one of the fine arts, ranking with music and painting and the drama, and having similar aims and uses. We do not, if we are wise, demand a moral, in the ordinary sense of the word, in the pictures we show our children and the music we play to them. We demand that the artist should be inspired, that he should be a true artist, touched with the fire of genius, and then let it be a comedy of Shakespeare's, or a landscape of Turner's, or even a dance tune of Chopin's. We use it fearlessly. As we have approached poetry for its own sake, poems shared around our dining room table often offer so familiar a scene that my children cannot help but erupt in smiles. My always hungry for a snack kids have a childless aunt who literally guards her pantry during their visits with the conviction of a mother bear protecting her cub. It's something we tease her about often. She does not want the kids eating up all her food in the kitchen. And then this poem states, "She locks the pantry door quite tight whenever she gets through, but jolly little cupboard smells keep stealing out to you, as though they said, 'Come, call some day when that good aunt has gone away. What need to put preserves in here, jellies and jams from year to year, to hide good things no child can touch? I wish your aunt would lose the key that's separating you from me.'" This poem by Effie Lee Newsome is called The Pantry's View, and it's from her volume of children's poetry called Gladiola Garden, originally published in 1940 and one of the first known volumes of children's poetry by an African-American woman. Living Book Press graciously agreed to republish The Lost Treasure when I approached the owner of the press, and I wrote the new foreword in this latest edition. Bringing the volume within reach of contemporary families was important to me because so many of the poems read and enjoyed by many families and in many classrooms are absent in the imagery and voices of Black and Brown people. Beloved volumes like Favorite Poems Old and New by Helen Ferris are filled with sweet verse, but their scope is limited, which is something worthy of serious consideration because many families spend years with books like that. Over time, my family has discovered a love for many Black poets who speak to us in a special way. In addition to Effie Lee Newsom, we've read Langston Hughes and Claude McKay and Paul Laurence Dunbar and Alice Walker and so on. Gwendolyn Brooks is one of the most highly regarded, influential, and widely read poets of the 20th century in America. But her work has never been mentioned in anything I've encountered within the homeschooling community. She was a much honored poet, even in her lifetime, with the distinction of being the first Black author to win the Pulitzer Prize. She also was a poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, the first Black woman to hold that position, and poet laureate of my home state of Illinois throughout my entire childhood. In fact, Gwendolyn Brooks's life and legacy impacted me so much that we named our youngest child Brooks in her honor. In the 1950s, Brooks published her first and only novel, Maud Martha, which details its title character's life in short vignettes. Maud suffers prejudice not only from white people, but also from lighter-skinned African Americans, something that mirrored Brooks's own experience. Eventually, Maud takes a stand for her own dignity by turning her back on a patronizing racist store clerk. One way of looking at the book, then, commented Harry B. Shaw, is a war with people's concepts. In a review, Annette Oliver Shands noted the way in which Brooks does not specify traits, niceties, or assets for members of the Black community to acquire in order to attain their just rights. So this is not a novel to inspire social advancement on the part of fellow Blacks, nor does it say be poor, Black, and happy. The message is to accept the challenge of being human and to assert humanness with urgency. Brooks brought the same message to her poetry, and I recognize similar themes and sentiments in poets who came before and after her. Paul Laurence Dunbar was born in 1872 to two formerly enslaved parents from Kentucky. He became one of the first influential Black poets in American literature and was internationally acclaimed for his dialectic verse. But the dialectic poems constitute only a small portion of Dunbar's canon, which is replete with novels and short stories and essays and many poems in standard English. In its entirety, Dunbar's literary body is regarded as an impressive representation of Black life in turn of the century America. As Dunbar's friend James Weldon Johnson noted in the preface to his book of American Negro poetry, Paul Laurence Dunbar stands out as the first poet from the Negro race in the United States to show a combined mastery over poetic material and poetic technique, to reveal innate literary distinction in what he wrote, and to maintain a high level of performance. He was the first to rise to a height from which he could take a perspective view of his own race. He was the first to see objectively its humor, its superstitions, its shortcomings, the first to feel sympathetically its heart wounds, its yearnings, its aspirations, and to voice them all in a purely literary form. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass. When the first bird sings and the first bud opes and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the caged bird feels. I know why the caged bird beats his wing till its blood is red on the cruel bars, for he must fly back to his perch and cling, when he fain would be on the bough a swing. And a pain still throbs in the old scars, and they pulse again with a keener sting. I know why he beats his wing. I know why the caged bird sings. Ah, me. When his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free, it is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. And perhaps some of you recognize this refrain of the caged bird because 77 years after Dunbar's death, renowned poet Maya Angelou rooted her lyrical verse, Caged Bird, in Dunbar's original piece. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. In his poem, Dunbar describes the caged bird's despair, which represents the historical oppression of African Americans. He uses the image of the locked up bird to give us a sense of what it feels like to live without freedom. Angelo revises Dunbar's sympathy by describing the opposing experiences of a free bird that can live in nature as it pleases and a caged bird that suffers in captivity. When I first suggested to friends that we share poems like these with our children, they resisted the idea of these complex themes, especially those related to racism, while simultaneously worrying that our children wouldn't understand the more sophisticated language. Educator Charlotte Mason wrote, "I saw it stated the other day that children do not care for poetry, that a stirring narrative in verse is much more to their taste. But they do like the tale, no doubt, but poetry appeals to them on other grounds, and Shelley's Skylark will hold a child entranced sooner than any moving anecdote." The poem she's referencing is a long one, but just to give you an idea, here are just a few stanzas. "We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Yet if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near." So, if we are to believe that our children can handle themes beyond childhood fancies, we shouldn't hesitate to share poems with complex ideas and evaluations of human life. In fact, Mason's example speaks of unfulfilled desires. Shelley's Skylark is an ode to the blithe essence of a singing skylark and how human beings can never ever reach that same bliss. And does the idea of communicating human experience through the metaphor of a bird sound familiar based on the poems I just read? We have no reason to withhold from our children poems by Dunbar or Angelo and others that are rooted in the pain and joy of African Americans. Their poems are iconic and induce emotion in all people, just as Shelley's does, because of their ability to assert humanness with urgency. If many of today's children were given the chance to hear this type of poetry read by someone who understands them, it would speak to their souls. Whenever I'm able, I try to capture the hearts of young men and women that God places before me by showing them the beauty of poetry. To do this, I sometimes must meet them in the non-threatening and familiar space of hip hop. And I'm certain that these words have never been uttered at a classical education conference before, so I'm going to hurry up and show you what I mean so I can make sure I get an invitation to come back. So poetry has a reputation of being elitist, but Andrew Lloyd Webber labeled T.S. Eliot as the inventor of rap music. Of course, he didn't mean that literally, but what he was saying is that the same patterns and use of alliteration in Eliot's poetry can be found in the verses of Jay-Z and Nas, two of today's top hip-hop artists. The Hippopotamus by T.S. Eliot. The broad-backed hippopotamus rests on his belly in the mud. Although he seems so firm to us, he is merely flesh and blood. Flesh and blood is weak and frail, susceptible to nervous shock, while the true church can never fail, for it is based upon a rock. And the poem goes on. When we lock poetry up in antique china cabinets and reserve it only for those who are in the know, we miss the opportunity to turn a generation of kids, maybe even would-be rappers, into aspiring poets who may or may not happen to yoke verse with rhythmic beats. Mediocre rap songs tend to feature repetitive phrases and lyrics that are about avid drug use or misogyny and excessive partying. But rap that is considered poetry tends to highlight lyrics that are intricate and complex. Socially conscious hip hop is a subgenre of rap that aims to question the dominant cultural, political, philosophical, and economic consensus. The acknowledgement of this type of poetry has never been more evident than when rapper Kendrick Lamar received the Pulitzer Prize in 2018. The Pulitzer Prize board called the critically acclaimed album a virtuosic song collection unified by its vernacular authenticity and rhythmic dynamism that offers affecting vignettes capturing the complexity of modern African American life. While speaking to a reporter shortly after his win, Lamar credited his 7th grade English teacher, Mr. Inge, who turned him on to poetry. A part of me lit up when I heard him say that in an interview because I knew exactly what he was doing. He was giving poor Black boys across America an out. He was giving them new vocabulary for something to pursue if they wanted to be like him, and that was poetry. Miraculously, the Pulitzer board members were able to look beyond the packaging that they likely found unfamiliar and may have even once deemed ugly or undeserving. And they found the gift of poetry wrapped within. Not the poetry of Frost or Wordsworth or Whitman or Keats or Shakespeare, but the poetry of a person who writes about being young, Black, poor, and gifted in America with a candid self-awareness of who he is, where he's from, and where he's been. Person who is no less deserving of the outlet of expression that verse affords each one of us. There is a generation of kids who are listening to him. Maybe not your kids, I get that. And honestly, until the Super Bowl, mine either. But our job as educators is not to hole up in academia, making sure that certain children gain the very best advantages while completely excluding those whose lives are entirely different than the children we work with or live with. So when I ask you today to be more inclusive, I'm looking for us to lead the way in offering the gifts of relational learning and spreading a poetic feast to all children. What if the same children who listen to Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar or Lecrae, a hip hop artist who loves Jesus Christ with all his heart, knew that what these admired artists were writing was poetry? Going back to Monk Gibbon that we heard from earlier before we close, he said that if we want our children to be lovers of poetry, if we want them to be rational and sane and broad-minded, the chances are all against it if we are ourselves minds of prejudice or backwaters of timid conventionality. It is a truism to say they learn by what we are far more than by what we say. Physician, heal thyself. Educator, educate thyself. In my book, A Place to Belong, I share a quote from a book called What is Poetry? In it, author Michael Rosen writes, poems are a midway point between poets and readers. The poet pours in one set of meanings. The reader picks up the poem and puts in another set of meanings. And the two meet somewhere in the middle. That's what reading a poem is all about. It's a conversation between two sets of thoughts, the poets and the readers. By regularly exposing children to the thoughts of varied poets, we help them participate in a conversation that no one else can have. No other person will hear or interpret a certain poet's words exactly the way any child does. This open-ended relationship that our kids can develop through verse with someone from another century or today, from a different country or next door, is a special gift. I've seen how much poetry has moved my children to learn more about various people and their cultural experiences. And perhaps most importantly, my children have developed a love for this form of self-expression, evidenced by the many jotted notes and verses of poetry they've written to share their views on life and the world around them. In the end, as I've watched my family eagerly rally around a diverse body of poets and poems, both complex and straightforward, I realized that it is not that I initially failed to comprehend poetry, it's that I had initially failed to care. Thankfully, second chances abound. Thank you so much.
Even my husband was like, "Oh, baby, that was good."
I know I went over my time a little bit.
No, you have time. We have the way I have the schedule, the next person is not till 12, I think.
Okay.
Paul, is that you? I think Paul is at 12. So there was time to just kind of take your time. So, I can give you a few more minutes to lead a discussion on what you shared. It was amazing. So thank you so much. I knew it was going to be amazing, and I hope you all enjoyed it too. Does anyone have any questions for Amber? And Amber, you can just facilitate your conversation too.
Okay. Any questions?